Summer 1914. Germany was the most powerful economy in Europe. The strongest currency, the best technology, the most advanced industries, a superpower in every sense of the word. Then someone made a decision. A tiny technical decision buried in a Reichsbank policy document. They froze the discount rate at 5%. Just froze it for 8 years. And in doing so, they didn't just destroy a currency. They destroyed 3 generations. They created a hunger so desperate that mothers would trade family heirlooms for a loaf of bread. They created an inflation so extreme that workers demanded to be paid twice a day because their morning wages would be worthless by lunch. By November 1923, $1 was worth 4.2 trillion German marks. A wheelbarrow full of cash couldn't buy a newspaper. Children used million-mark notes as building blocks. People burned money in their fireplaces because it was cheaper than buying firewood. But here's what nobody tells you. The Holocaust didn't start with printing too much money. It started with something far more stupid. A central bank that refused to raise interest rates while the country burned through cash like gasoline. They kept the rate at 5%, while prices doubled, while prices tripled, while prices rose 40 times. The Reichsbank president, Rudolf Havenstein, actually believed he was being responsible. He thought he was preventing a crisis. Instead, he created the textbook definition of hyperinflation. The kind that destroys democracies, the kind that births dictators, the kind that ends with world wars. Today you're going to see how one frozen number in a central bank policy turned the German economic miracle into a starvation nightmare. How the smartest economists in Europe convinced themselves that inflation wasn't real, and how their refusal to touch one stupid little interest rate gave us Adolf Hitler. Let me paint you a picture of what life was like. August 1922. You're 32 years old. You're a metal worker at a factory in Munich. Skilled tradesman. Good job. Respectable. Your weekly wage is 16,000 marks. This sounds like a lot, but it's not. Because last week a loaf of bread cost 160 marks. This week, 240 marks. Next week, who knows? Maybe 400, maybe 800. You get paid on Friday afternoon. You literally run, not walk, to the bakery. Because if you wait until Saturday morning, bread might be 300 marks. If you wait until Monday, it might be impossible to buy at any price. Your wife meets you at the bakery with a wheelbarrow, not for groceries, for the money. Because 16,000 marks in paper bills weighs more than the bread you're buying. You need the wheelbarrow to carry the cash, not the food. You see your neighbor, Herr Schmidt. He's 67, retired civil servant, 30 years of loyal service to the Reich. He has a pension, 180 marks per month. In 1914, that was good money, enough to live comfortably. In 1914, a pound of bread cost 0.29 marks. His pension could buy 620 loaves of bread per month. In August 1922, bread is 240 marks per pound. His pension buys 0.75 loaves, 3/4 of one loaf. For the entire month, Herr Schmidt is starving to death. On a government pension, because someone at the Reichsbank decided that 5% was the right interest rate, and changing it would be irresponsible. But here's what really makes your blood boil. The Reichsbank president, Rudolf Havenstein, is giving speeches. Confident speeches. To the newspapers, to the politicians. He says, and I'm not making this up, there is no inflation in Germany. His logic? The total value of marks in circulation, when measured in gold, is actually less than before the war. Therefore, he's being restrictive, he's being prudent. The real problem, he says, is speculators, foreign conspirators, anyone but the central bank. Meanwhile, you just watched Herr Schmidt trade his wedding ring, a gold band that survived 40 years of marriage, for 6 loaves of bread. 6 loaves, that's it. A lifetime of love, compressed into 6 days of food. And the Reichsbank rate? Still 5%. Unchanged. Unmoved. Because Havenstein genuinely believes that raising rates would make things worse. He thinks he's saving Germany. By December 1922, your weekly wage is 374,000 marks. Bread is 7,400 marks per loaf. You're making more money than you ever dreamed possible. You're also poorer than you've ever been, Your savings account, the one you'd been building for 10 years to buy a house? In 1914, it had 12,000 marks, enough for a down payment. Now, it might buy a newspaper. Maybe, if the newsstand owner is feeling generous. The truly insane part? The government keeps insisting everything is fine. Professor Julius Wolff, a celebrated economist, writes in newspapers, "In proportion to the need, less money circulates in Germany now than before the war." Professor Elster agrees. However enormous the rise in circulation may appear, actually the figures show a decline. These aren't fringe lunatics. These are the top minds in German economics. And they're all reading the same numbers and reaching the same deranged conclusion. There's no inflation because we say there's no inflation. Then, January 1923. The nightmare gets worse. France and Belgium invade the Ruhr Valley, Germany's industrial heartland. Why? Because Germany missed a reparations payment, a coal delivery, the 34th missed payment in 36 months. The German government responds with passive resistance. They tell workers, don't cooperate with the invaders, go on strike. We'll keep paying your wages. 2 million people stop working, but the government keeps cutting checks. Where does the money come from? The Reichsbank. Where does the Reichsbank get the money? They print it. How do they justify printing it? Because the discount rate is still only 5%, so technically this isn't inflation. You see the problem yet? By July 1923, your weekly wage is meaningless. The number changes daily, sometimes hourly. Some factories start paying workers twice a day. Morning shift gets paid at lunch, because by evening, morning wages are worthless. The official discount rate? Finally raised. To 18% in April, to 30% in August, to 90% in September. Too little, too late, too stupid. By November 1923, money has ceased to function. Farmers refuse to sell food for marks. They want gold, foreign currency, or barter. Cities send armed raiding parties into the countryside to steal potatoes. People riot for bread. Law and order collapse. $1 now equals 4.2 trillion marks. 4.2 trillion. The number is so absurd it loses meaning. A cup of coffee that cost 5,000 marks when you sat down costs 7,000 marks by the time you finish drinking it. Herr Schmidt, your neighbor? He died in October. Malnutrition, tuberculosis, old age, take your pick. His death certificate lists natural causes, but you know better. He was murdered by a 5% interest rate that somebody, somewhere, decided must never change. Here's where it gets really stupid. The hyperinflation wasn't an accident. It wasn't a surprise. It was a choice. From 1914 to 1922, 8 full years, the Reichsbank had one simple job. Raise the discount rate when prices rise. That's it. That's central banking 101. When inflation appears, you raise rates. You make money more expensive. You cool the economy. But Rudolf Havenstein, the Reichsbank president, refused. Categorically refused. Why? Because he looked at the data and saw something different. He calculated the total value of marks in circulation, converted to gold value, and compared it to 1913 levels. And you know what? He was right. In gold terms, there was less money circulating than before the war. His mistake was confusing the stock of money with the flow of money. Confusing value with velocity. People weren't holding marks. They were spending them immediately, running from them like they were on fire. The Reichsbank kept printing more marks to replace the ones fleeing into real assets. But because people spent money faster and faster, prices rose faster than the money supply. A vicious cycle. The faster they printed, the faster people spent, the faster prices rose. And through it all, Havenstein insisted, "We're not printing too much, we're printing too little. Look at the gold value! We're being restrictive!" He genuinely, honestly, truly believed he was the responsible one. The steady hand, the voice of reason in a crisis. But here's the really twisted part. Havenstein wasn't stupid. He was a brilliant banker. Before the war, he'd managed the gold standard flawlessly. He understood monetary policy better than almost anyone alive. His fatal flaw was simpler. He refused to admit he'd made a mistake. In 1914, when war broke out, freezing rates at 5% made sense. It was a temporary emergency measure. Finance the war. Deal with inflation later. Every country did it. But then the war ended. Germany lost. The Versailles Treaty imposed massive reparations. The economy was in chaos. The obvious move was to raise rates, stabilize the currency, take the pain, rebuild. Havenstein couldn't do it. Because raising rates meant admitting the 5% freeze had been wrong. It meant admitting that years of his assurances were lies. It meant destroying his legacy. So he doubled down. He insisted inflation was caused by reparations, by speculators, by foreign conspiracies. Anything but monetary policy. And he kept rates frozen until reality forced his hand in 1922. By then, it was too late. The damage was done. The psychology had shifted. Once people lose faith in a currency, raising rates doesn't fix it. You need something more dramatic. On November 15, 1923, Germany introduced a new currency, the Rentenmark, backed not by gold, but by mortgages on agricultural and industrial land, a paper currency backed by real assets. More importantly, the new government did something Havenstein never would. They stopped printing money. Cold turkey. The Reichsbank was forbidden from buying government debt. No more monetizing deficits, no more printing to pay wages. The hyperinflation ended almost immediately. Like turning off a faucet, prices stabilized. The economy began to function again, but the damage was permanent. The middle class was annihilated. Everyone with savings, pensions, bonds, insurance policies, they all lost everything. Wealth accumulated over generations vanished overnight. Who benefited? Debtors. Anyone who owed money saw their debts evaporate. Companies with big loans paid them off with worthless marks. Homeowners with mortgages became debt-free. And the wealthy, the truly wealthy with real assets, they were fine. They owned land, factories, gold. Inflation hurt them, but didn't destroy them. The losers were the prudent ones, the savers, the pensioners. The people who'd done everything right, who'd worked hard, saved diligently, trusted the system. The system murdered them, with a 5% interest rate and a refusal to admit error. So, what's the moral of this catastrophe? Here's the truth that nobody wants to hear. Intelligence is no defense against stupidity. Rudolf Havenstein was brilliant. His economic advisors were the best minds in Germany. They had PhDs from the finest universities. They wrote the textbooks. And they were catastrophically, murderously wrong. Because they made the classic mistake. They confused their model with reality. Their calculations said there was no inflation. Their theories said they were being restrictive. Their data, interpreted through their framework, told them they were right. So they ignored the evidence in front of them. The starving pensioners, the wheelbarrows full of cash, the bread riots, the collapsing society, they chose their theory over reality, and millions suffered. The second lesson: monetary policy is not neutral. Interest rates are not just numbers on a spreadsheet. They're the price of time itself. They determine whether people save or spend, whether businesses invest or hoard, whether economies grow or collapse. When you freeze interest rates at an artificial level, you're not avoiding a decision, you're making a decision. You're choosing to distort every price signal in the economy. You're forcing reality to conform to your policy rather than conforming your policy to reality. And reality always wins. Always. The question is just how much destruction happens before you admit it. The third lesson, and this is the one that should terrify you. Weimar Germany's hyperinflation didn't just destroy wealth. It destroyed trust. Trust in government. Trust in money. Trust in the social contract itself. When Herr Schmidt watched his life savings become worthless, he didn't just lose money. He lost faith. Faith that playing by the rules matters. Faith that virtue is rewarded. Faith that tomorrow will be better than today. And when an entire generation loses faith simultaneously, you get chaos. You get extremism. You get desperate people looking for someone, anyone, who promises to restore order. In 1923, a failed artist and war veteran staged a coup in a Munich beer hall. His name was Adolf Hitler. The coup failed. He was arrested. But the conditions that made people listen to him? Those were created by hyperinflation, the destroyed middle class, the resentment, the humiliation, the desperation. A decade later, Hitler was chancellor. the Weimar Republic was dead, and the world was heading toward another war that would kill 70 million people. You can draw a straight line from Havenstein's frozen interest rate to the gates of Auschwitz. That's not hyperbole, that's history. The final lesson, we're doing it again. After 2008, central banks around the world dropped rates to zero. After COVID, they printed trillions. And now, even as inflation returns, there's enormous pressure to keep rates low, to keep the party going, to avoid pain. The logic is the same as Havenstein's. We're not printing too much, we're printing what's necessary. The real problem is supply chains, or corporate greed, or foreign adversaries, anything but monetary policy. And maybe they're right. Maybe this time is different. Maybe modern central banks, with their sophisticated models and real-time data, won't make Havenstein's mistake. Or maybe, just maybe, they're making the same mistake with better computers. Because here's what never changes: political pressure. The pressure to keep rates low, to keep asset prices high, to avoid recession, to kick the can down the road. Politicians don't get re-elected by causing pain today to prevent catastrophe tomorrow. They get re-elected by making people feel good right now. And central bankers, no matter how independent they claim to be, feel that pressure. They're human, they want to be liked, they want to be seen as saviors, not villains. So they hesitate, they wait, they hope things get better on their own. They convince themselves that their models are right and the evidence is wrong. Until one day, like July 1922 in Germany, the dam breaks. Inflation becomes hyperinflation. Control becomes chaos, and by then it's too late to fix it without destroying millions of lives. The tragedy of Weimar Germany isn't just what happened, it's that it was preventable. Completely, obviously preventable. All Havenstein had to do was admit he was wrong and raise rates in 1919, or 1920, or 1921. But he didn't. Because admitting error is harder than destroying a nation. That's the real lesson. That's the one that should keep you awake at night. Because the next Havenstein is out there right now, in some central bank somewhere, looking at his models and convincing himself that everything is fine. And maybe it is. Or maybe, in 20 years, we'll be making documentaries about how obvious the warning signs were. How clear the parallels to Weimar were. How stupid we were to ignore them. Someone always pays for monetary mistakes. The only question is who and when, and how many zeros end up on the price tags before we figure it out. So now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching this from. Your city, your country. Because this story isn't just about Germany in 1923. It's about every country that thinks it can print its way to prosperity. Are you seeing warning signs where you live? Rising prices that don't match official inflation numbers? Central bankers insisting everything is under control while your grocery bill doubles? Asset bubbles that everyone knows will pop but nobody wants to acknowledge. Tell me what you're seeing. Let's build a real-time map of monetary insanity before it's too late. And if this video showed you how one frozen interest rate can destroy a civilization, hit that subscribe button. This is Collapso, where we prove that the stupidest tricks come from the smartest people. See you in the next collapse.